So let's talk about March 2026. A single narrow waterway was shut down, and just like that, the entire global economy was brought to its knees. This is the story of the Hormuz Crisis, what the experts are calling the largest energy supply disruption in history. We're going to break down exactly how it happened, why it's a huge deal, and what it means for all of us. And look, don't just take my word for it. That quote right there, that's from the International Energy Agency, the world's top energy watchdog. That's how big this was. This wasn't some isolated regional conflict. No, this was a crisis that rippled out and touched literally every corner of the globe, affecting everything from the price you pay for gas to the food on your supermarket shelves. So the big question is, how on earth did we get here? How does a regional confrontation blow up into a full-blown global crisis? Well, it all started with a single military operation in one of the most sensitive spots on the planet. Okay, so the first domino falls on February 28th. A joint U.S.-Israeli military operation, codenamed Epic Fury, kicks off with a series of airstrikes. The targets? Iranian leadership and some key military infrastructure. This was a direct shot, and you just knew it was going to set the stage for a major response. And Iran's countermove was, you have to admit, strategically brilliant and absolutely devastating. Instead of just firing back with missiles, they went for an economic pressure point. On March 4th, they did it. They shut down the Strait of Hormuz, basically holding the world's energy supply hostage. Now, to really get why that one single action was so catastrophic, you have to understand what the Strait of Hormuz really is. It's not just some patch of water. It's the main artery for about a fifth of all the oil and natural gas the world uses. Closing it down is like clamping the fuel line to the entire global economy. The first place to feel the shockwave, unsurprisingly, was the Persian Gulf itself. The closure of the strait triggered, and this is no exaggeration, a total systemic collapse of the regional economic model. I mean, their whole system is built on the free flow of goods and energy, and suddenly that was gone. First, the oil just stopped. The tankers couldn't get out of port, so producers all over the Gulf had to slam the brakes on production. By the middle of March, at least 10 million barrels of oil per day had vanished from the market. Just gone. Then, things got personal. This quickly spiraled into what people on the ground were calling a grocery supply emergency. Think about it. Gulf nations import over 80% of their food through that very strait. With the route closed, supply chains just snapped, and prices for basic things like bread and rice shot up by over 120%. But it gets even scarier. The conflict created this terrifying humanitarian risk. We saw strikes targeting desalination plants. In countries like Kuwait and Qatar, those plants supply up to 99% of their drinking water. This was a threat to the very source of life in the region. The fallout was just immense. Huge airlines like Emirates and Qatar Airways were grounded. A mass exodus of foreign workers and tourists kicked off, and as one think tank put it, this was the end of the narrative of the Gulf as this permanently safe, stable hub for business and travel. That image was just shattered. All right, so this regional implosion, it definitely didn't stay regional for long. Let's trace how these shockwaves went global, hitting energy-hungry nations thousands of miles away. Asia got hit first, and they got hit hard. Major economies like China, India, Japan, and South Korea are incredibly dependent on the Gulf. I mean, some of them get up to 75% of their oil imports through that single strait. This left them completely exposed. And, this wasn't just about oil. This is a crucial point. Qatar supplies a fifth of the world's liquefied natural gas. When they had to declare they couldn't fulfill their contracts, Asian LNG prices more than doubled overnight. For countries like Japan, this immediately became a national energy security crisis. Meanwhile, over in Europe, they were in a really, really tough spot. The crisis hit right after a brutal winter had drained their natural gas reserves down to historic lows. We're talking just 30% full. They had absolutely no cushion to absorb the shock of losing all that gas from Qatar. So what did that all add up to? Well, for Europe, it meant a second massive energy crisis in just a few years. The European Central Bank started throwing around warnings about stagflation, that toxic mix of high inflation and zero growth, and a likely recession for industrial powerhouses like Germany and Italy. Okay, so we've talked about markets and nations, but what does this actually mean for you? For regular people living their lives? Because this stuff hit home, and it hit fast. The first place pretty much everyone felt this was, you guessed it, at the gas pump. Brent crude, which is the global benchmark for oil, just skyrocketed from around $72 to nearly $120 a barrel. In the US, that shoved average gas prices way over $4 a gallon, and they just kept climbing. And that pain at the pump, it started this awful chain reaction. See, high energy prices meant nitrogen fertilizer, which is made from natural gas, doubled in cost. That, in turn, drove up global food prices, squeezing every household budget and putting the brakes on economic growth. But the fallout went way beyond just gas and groceries. The ripple effects were everywhere. We saw huge numbers of flight cancellations. Shortages started popping up for key industrial materials made in the Gulf, like sulfur and helium, which messes with everything from farming to making computer chips. And yeah, in some countries, it led to straight-up panic buying and fuel rationing. So, with the world economy basically teetering on the brink, all eyes turned to the diplomats. The pressure was on to find a way out of this mess. But, well, it's been anything but straightforward. We saw a little glimmer of hope when a ceasefire was called, pausing the direct military attacks. But that hope kinda died when these high-stakes talks between US and Iranian officials in Islamabad just completely collapsed over the weekend. That failure pushed the whole crisis into a brand new and much more dangerous phase. With diplomacy off the table, the United States has now decided to escalate. A full naval blockade of the strait is going into effect. The stated mission is to cut off any revenue to Iran from passing ships and to start the incredibly dangerous work of clearing mines. This is a huge military gamble. And that leaves us right here with this enormous, hanging question. Negotiations have failed, military forces are now facing off in the world's most critical waterway, and the entire global economy is just holding its breath, waiting for an answer to how this historic crisis is finally going to end.